Back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
An amendment to H.R. 6824 offered by
Without
Mr.
objection, the
Massie.
amendment will be considered as read. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized to explain his amendment.
The amendment's very simple. In fact, it includes includes language that the Democrats asked me to include in this bill, and I think they had good ideas, so we put them in this amendment. The amendment also just clarifies what it is that the FBI is going to have to give to us in this report, and because we want it to be complete. We want to know things, for instance, like if you were denied a firearm and through the NICS background check system, and then you applied for an appeal, what was the success rate? Is there a racial disparity in the appeals process? And that's something that we're concerned about. I want to thank Ms. Jackson-Lee for being consistent on this issue. We shouldn't have racial disparities in drug prosecutions. As AI technology develops, we want to make sure there's no racial disparities in that. We've talked about facial recognition in the Oversight Committee and how we need to make sure there's no racial disparities there. And Ms. Jackson-Lee has been consistent in that, in her pursuit of equality under the law. And I appreciate her consistency in supporting this as well. It's a genuine concern. There's no gotchas here in the bill and no gotchas in the amendment. And I think it'll shed some light and cause us to be able to improve the system in a way that's more fair than currently is. And I just, real quickly, last Congress, there were some conservatives who opposed this amendment because it calls for reporting of sex and gender, both. And they thought that my bill suggested that sex and gender are two different things. The reality is the ATF on Form 4473, they once used to ask for sex, and now they ask for gender, or vice versa. So we have to ask for both sex and gender on this. This isn't some woke ideology that's crept its way into my to my law here that I'm trying to pass. It's basically just the reality of the Form 4473 and how they've asked the question differently over time. One other thing I want to clarify, the demographic data will include race, ethnicity, national origin, sex, gender, age, disability, and English language proficiency of the applicant, but these won't be identifiable. They will not identify individuals. The reports that we're asking will protect the privacy of everybody who has undergone the background check system. We're not trying to identify these people individually. We want to know statistically. So those things will not be revealed. The individuals won't be revealed through that data. And so there will be no privacy infringement on this. Again, I think the amendment that I've offered here needs to be adopted. One of the things also that I added in the amendment is we want to know the demographic data of the people who were approved. Because if we're going to establish a rate of disapproval, we have to have a denominator. And in the first bill that I offered that the Democrats generously accepted last Congress, we just sort of trusted that the FBI would give us that number, and I want to be clear in the amendment that they need to tell us not just the demographics of the people who were denied, but of those who were approved, so that we can establish a baseline and know if there's, in order to know if there's a disparity in terms of percentage. And with that, I yield back.
Mr. Chairman. The gentleman yields back. Go to the ranking member, then we'll go to Mr. Ivey.
Mr. Chairman, I find myself perplexed for the second day in a row. I find myself in total agreement with Mr. Massie. It's a good amendment. I support the amendment. And I think from long knowledge of Mr. Massie, I can assure everyone that there is no woke ideology in this amendment. So I urge the amendment. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized. Then I'll come to Sheila.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. To Mr. Massie, I appreciate this language. I'm inclined to support it. I did have a question, But before I get to that, I did want to suggest a couple of things. I think the points you made about potential for confusing names. When I was a prosecutor, one of the things we ran into was confusion of surnames with respect to in the Latino community, because sometimes just culturally they did it differently than the people who were checking documents. It wasn't necessarily just the NICS check, but just some of the, when we were trying to make sure we had the right people that matched up with the fingerprints. So that might be one of the factors as well. The other one I ran into was identity theft. You know, brother or cousin giving somebody else's name and it not getting cleared up. I don't know if that's a factor here, but that would certainly be something I'd be interested in finding out, because we do want to try and correct that kind of inaccurate information. I did also want to suggest, along the lines of what the ranking member said and Ms. Jackson-Lee, about sort of some of the broader issues that we should take a look at. Now, we're not going to do it today, and I get that, but the background check piece, and I might be behind on this, but the Lakewood shooting, one of the things I read in the paper, and that was overtaken by Kansas City, sadly, but that the woman who was the shooter in that case had been red flagged, or the gun had been seized or something in a court proceeding just a few years earlier. So one of the questions I came away with was, well, how did she get another gun? And that might have been answered, I might have missed it, but those are the types of things that I would love to see if we could review in the committee or even in the subcommittee. I'm not on the subcommittee, but I would love to come sit in, because I think those are critical issues. And others, ghost guns and the like, I'd love to see us try and take some of that on as well. With respect to this language, though, English language proficiency, I was sort of curious as to what the goal is there in seeking that information, and also how are they going to determine that? Is that something where they're sort of self-selected by the person filling out the form, or does somebody make an evaluation about it? How does that work? And I yield to the gentleman.
I'm not sure if it's on the form 4473 or not. If somebody on the staff could look at that to see if they choose that. But one of the concerns that I have there is it harder for you to navigate the legal system based on English language proficiency? Let's say you're denied, and then you're trying to do an appeal, and if how well do you fare in that appeal? By the way, the first appeal is easy, and it's almost de facto and granted to you. But after that appeal, you go into the legal system, and I know I've used this argument before in judiciary, and it doesn't get much traction because 90% of the people here are lawyers. But after that first appeal, you got to hire a lawyer and pay money, and which I know isn't a problem for the lawyers on this dais. But what I'm concerned about is the appeals process, and is it going to be harder for somebody without English language proficiency?
I thank the gentleman, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy.